we need Julian Assange. And one thing I want to say to you today is, it is not only that he is the victim of torture, it is not only that his life is at stake, it is not only we want to save him from a dreadful injustice, we also want to save him because the world needs Julian Assange as a symbol and fighter for liberty.
Okay, we're back. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on the Progressive Radio Network with a special edition of Assange Countdown to Freedom with two special guests who were on this show when we first started way back in 2017. They were out there at the very beginning, even way before that, folks. I'm very happy to see a lot of people now getting involved and getting involved over the last couple of years. But these two have been in the trenches for, I would say, 11 years since Assange was first being jostled around. Jessalyn Radack, who heads Whisper, she's a longtime defender of whistleblowers, including our other guest, Thomas Drake. Thomas Drake is, as he says, an incongruent, divergent, prosecuted, exposing state powers, certain truths, and all sorts of other things. Just goes on forever. But I want to thank both of you. They're both early recipients of the prestigious Sam Adams Award as whistleblowers. They're both heroes of mine, and I have not spoken to either one of them. Tom right after the Daniel Hale sentencing, and Jessalyn right before Reality Winner, actually a few months before, was set free. So she's out and Daniel Hale's in, unfortunately, and it's good to have you both on the show again. Hello, Jessalyn. Hello, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
And
good to see you. Good to see you again, Randy.
So, of course, we'll get into the Hale case in a minute and the Winner case and a little later on. But Julian Assange, last Friday, we have not, the three of us, spoken about that case in months. I think it was during the last segment of the extradition hearing with Judd Baraitser. So let me go to you first, Jess. Your initial impression when he was denied by this new High Court to stay back in London, that he will be extradited.
I was actually shocked because I thought the earlier decision, had been the right decision, and all they needed to do was simply affirm it. But the U.S. came in at the last minute, giving them a bunch of assurances. But when the UK High Court overturned the earlier decision to block extradition, I was afraid, not only for Julian, but now for any journalist who's covering national security anywhere around the world is in jeopardy. So I was worried about, obviously, the immediate implications for Julian, but also this is just a huge loss for human rights, press freedom globally, and for WikiLeaks and Assange more specifically.
Tom, your initial reactions?
Yeah, I'm actually not surprised. I have to say that. I was expecting the distinct possibility that they would actually overturn it and push forward with extradition. I mean, I realize he still has a couple of more options in terms of appeal, and his lawyers have indicated that. But the fact remains the US and UK are really tightly coupled on this, behind the scenes, no doubt. and have been for quite a while. And they just want to make an example of them. They want to establish precedent of being able to, jack up a journalist who exposes the secrets of empire. And in this case, it's primarily the secrets of the U.S. empire. And it doesn't matter that they are war crimes. It doesn't matter that they reveal really, just incredibly egregious activities on the part of the U.S., who obviously doesn't want the public to know about it, even though all kinds of information has come out. And WikiLeaks certainly exposed some horrendous things that were done on behalf of the U.S. It's just, you can start listing the litany of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So they just want to punish him, really punish him. My concern actually is based on what came out right after the decision, is that he apparently had a stroke back on 27 October. And so I'm very concerned at this point about his personal health and well-being, whether he can actually survive going forward, just as a human being. I think that's what's really at stake right now. I'm certainly familiar with, what happens when the government comes after you. Here, if they establish the precedent, if they're able to extradite him, he's going to be, in a world of hurt in terms of the legal side of the case, but also the assurances don't mean anything. The assurances that's all figment. That's all. Those are all just figments. It's a gossamer cover to make it look like the U.S. is not going to further punish him. They've already punished him. So if they bring him back to the United States, I wouldn't be surprised. He's going to be in extraordinary isolation, and the question becomes whether or not he could survive that.
Jesslyn, you work with the Justice Department. What do you have to say about the assurances?
I think the assurances are not worth the paper that they're written on. I felt like they were very duplicitous. For example, when the assurances say, "Oh, don't worry, we won't put him in a supermax," there are many other kinds of confinement. For example, Daniel Hale, also incarcerated for violating the Espionage Act. They have him in a communications management unit, which were originally set up under the pretext of housing terrorists. And he has no communication. It's near with anyone. I am barely able to communicate with him as his lawyer. So there are a lot of other methods of confinement that are just as bad or worse than the supermax. So I find these assurances, which by the way have an escape clause saying that the U.S. can change its mind at any time, I find these assurances to be empty and even worse, just completely deceitful.
Yes, Tom. Now the stroke. It's the imminent threat of coming to the U.S. Already spending all this time in jail. You had this hanging over your head. What's the daily pressure psychologically of knowing that you might be in a situation that he's
No, it's. I have some sense of it. I certainly didn't end up in prison and or was in some confinement detainment. But I had this thing hanging over me, sort of the sword of Damocles hanging over me for all those years, even pre-trial, in my own case. And it's very debilitating. You really feel the pressure as a human being. You're already isolated. You're separated from all of your previous social networks. You find out who your real friends are. And you're looking into a future that's quite bleak. And I myself experienced the equivalent of post-traumatic stress syndrome, lost weight. It's just, the pressures are enormous, and your body really ends up having to absorb all that. In his case, it's far more intense. There's no question that this past 11 years, if you go all the way back to the home confinement period, then he ends up, in the embassy. Of course, that was asylum that was actually granted to him, and under international protocols. And then, of course, that gets violated as he gets pulled out of the Ecuadorian embassy and ends up being thrown into Belmarsh. And Belmarsh is one of their maximum security prisons. The few pictures that have come out are descriptions of him from people that have been there. They're not good at all. This goes back several months now. And, having met him several times when he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, he's increasingly, it's hard for me to recognize him anymore. I have to say that on a human level. And so that's where my real concerns are. I don't think the United States cares. The United States, even in my own case, they were actually spreading rumors that I was suicidal. They were spreading rumors that I was in a very depressed state. And I don't think they care. I don't think if he ended up dying, right, in prison, they're okay with that, right? It gets rid of, quote unquote, one of their enemies of the state, as a foreign national, because, he dared hold up a mirror. You can take issue with him personally. I know people that don't really care for him, but he's become a lightning rod for a whole lot. You have to remember what was disclosed, what he actually disclosed. And if the precedent is set, if he ends up being extradited, then no journalism outfit, no media outlet, no reporter is going to be safe, because just like they did with sources, they're doing the same thing here. They want to set a precedent. And that means that even the New York Times of the world, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and any other media outlet remember, you have to remember, go all the way back to Daniel Ellsberg. The door was always left open that the government could come back, right? They tried it in Ellsberg, where they wanted to go after the publisher. It didn't succeed then, but the door was left open. If you go back and carefully look at what the precedent and the decisions that were made then, the door was left open, that there was nothing to prevent the United States to go after a publisher for, quote unquote, having revealed state secrets.
Jessalyn, well, by the way, Ellsberg would have loved to have been on this show, but it's 6 o'clock in the morning in California, where he is. I know both of you are friends of his. I've seen photos. He admires both of you deeply. Jessalyn, what about that? About the First Amendment? Will it be eliminated right now? Do we have what Ellsberg said the other day? What the Brits have is the Official Secrecy Act. And he says the Espionage Act is our version of the Official Secrecies Act.
That's correct. Picking up on what Tom said, it's very significant that, there's this huge kind of sideshow debate going on about whether or not he's really a quote unquote journalist. And I would argue that is, first of all, irrelevant. And second of all, they're a very slippery slope to be going down. Well, he's not a real publisher. He's not a journalist. He's won all these awards for publishing and journalism. And where do you draw the line between radio broadcast, which you do, and blogging, which other people do? There's so many mediums of journalism. So they've created this sideshow, which is really irrelevant. I think the First Amendment implications, what you were asking, I've always said the war on whistleblowers was a backdoor war on journalists. And to the extent that they pulled out the Espionage Act, that is one of the most dangerous laws that can be used against anybody, because it doesn't allow you any kind of defense.
I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on Progressive Radio Network. We are talking with Jessalyn Radack and both of you are my dear friends. I consider Thomas Drake, two whistleblowers, both worked for the government for years. Tom, who's really driving to you? Is it a multitude of national security establishments? Organizations? Who's really the hidden hand in this whole affair, in your estimation?
I think there's both. hidden and exposed hands in this. You have the national security state, who clearly took great exception to the revelations, the extraordinary revelations that were published by WikiLeaks going back many, many years, including during the same year in which they really became a known worldwide in 2010, the same year in which I was indicted by my own government. I think you have bipartisan support as well. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on; they both have their grievances against Assange. And so here is a case where it was Obama. There was those who were pushing Obama to actually go after Assange. Obviously, there was First Amendment implications. All of this got resurrected under Trump, and here's Biden continuing at full blower. And obviously they're not stopping it. There's no indication at all within the DOJ, and I'm sure Jess has something to say about this. No indication at all that there's anybody who wants to end this. I think there was some hope that when Biden became president, that they would shut it down because of the First Amendment implications. I don't think the government cares at this point. I really don't. I think they are so obsessed with establishing the precedent that they can actually get him extradited and can get him charged and convicted under the Espionage Act in particular. Although I know one of the counts is actually a CFA. It's a conspiracy to quote unquote to hack. It's ironic when I look back on this, because this is sort of the next level beyond just punishing sources. I was a whistleblower. I ultimately made a fateful decision to go to the press myself, and the government actually claimed that the reporter was the only eyewitness to a crime. There was a point at which they threatened to bring, or at least attempt to bring, the reporter into the courtroom and put the reporter on the stand. They also said that I allegedly had created exceptionally grave damage against the national security of the United States. Just take this now up to the level of the publisher. So it's not just.
I would also jump in and say that at the Justice Department under Obama, during his presidency, Eric Holder at Justice specifically did not bring this case because he knew it would create a New York Times problem. And by that, I mean, it would make the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Dizit, all these news outlets around the country and around the world equally vulnerable, because they all publish classified information on a daily basis. They've won all sorts of journalistic prizes, as has Julian Assange, based on their journalism. So at least they, decided to shelve it. I wish they had dismissed it, because it left it out there for someone who we don't quote unquote trust to pick it back up again, which is what happened with Assange, what happened in Daniel Hale's case. Trump was able to pick that up and made he's very open about the fact that he wanted to go after whistleblowers and have a head on a pike.
Tom, do you really think that, if he had walked out of that embassy during Obama's administration, that they wouldn't have sought extradition? They wouldn't have, ginned up the charges as they did under Trump? Do you really believe that? Or do you think that's something they can put out there as window dressing and say, we didn't do it?
Yeah, that's sort of speculation as to the what ifs. They certainly did everything they could to violate, even early on, right? We know that there was multiple attempts to basically. I mean, you're talking about an international protocol, right? I mean, if you're granted asylum by a sovereign country, another sovereign country can't violate it, even though, and remember, every embassy in another country is sovereign territory of that country that's being represented. Obviously, when there was a change of administration in Ecuador, we have a new president. that changed. I mean, obviously that changed, and so they had their opening. So obviously that meant that they were ready to go if things turned differently, and so they decided to go after him.
Jesselyn, why do you have any hope in anyone in the Justice Department, from Merrick Garland to a person I worked with in Tulia, Texas, when she was with the NAACP LDF, that would be Vanita Gupta, coming out and either resigning or using their influence to, negate this this extradition request?
I have no confidence that will happen. I feel confident that it will not. Basically, this is being approved by and discussed with the Justice Department at the highest levels. And the fact that you may have people who at one point in their career did some good things doesn't negate the fact that they are now working for the nation's leading law enforcement agency. And, no, they could have pulled the plug on this at many different junctures over the last 2 years. And that goes for Reality Winner, Daniel Hale, Assange. They could intervene in a number of ways to change the outcome, and they have not.
Tom, is this career over conscience? In your case, you put conscience in front of career. Is that what's happening with some of these people, like the individual I mentioned earlier, Vanita Gupta?
Probably is. I mean, in some cases, I think, they end up just suppressing what they may really think because they don't want to jeopardize their career. I mean, they're in very senior positions. Obviously, most people will not stand up. I mean, why would you sacrifice yourself? Why would you get in the way? I mean, there's just too much support in the United States, both in terms of the legal community, the law enforcement, as well as the judicial side, the DOJ, and obviously the national security apparatus. They want Assange heads on a pike. They really do. They want to make an example of him. They want him as sacrifice, similar to what happened to me as the first whistleblower since Ellsberg, charged as a non-spy under the Espionage Act. They want to do the same thing to Julian as a publisher. And so, this is where this becomes extremely serious. It's as if, the government is at war, in this case with the First Amendment, meaning the First Amendment is actually in the way. So they're having to basically set it aside. And that's effectively what's happening with all of these cases. It's just that if Assange himself ends up being extradited and then found guilty under the Espionage Act, that's an enormously consequential precedent. It will, in fact, it's gonna. You talk about opening Pandora's box, the very box that Ellsberg had this warned about all these many years since his own case.
Jesselyn, this case will be, when it goes to court, if he is extradited, and it looks very likely that he will, unless something happens here. It will be in the Eastern District of Virginia, in a notorious court in Alexandria. I say notorious because they have like a 99.5% conviction rate. Tell us about that court and the prosecutor in this case.
That court is actually the most conservative court in the entire country. And it's also called the Espionage Court. There's not really an espionage court, but it's where 95% of the Espionage Act prosecutions in this country have taken place. And obviously the government was forum shopping. I mean, technically you could use any different number of jurisdictions to indict Assange. But this court was very specifically chosen because in all these Espionage Act cases, they have found people guilty. Even at Daniel Hale's sentencing, the government, the Justice Department, argued that Daniel Hale should be punished more harshly than he ended up being because Reality Winner wasn't punished enough. And that just shows a level of vindictiveness. You asked about the prosecutor. himself. It's Kronberg. It's the same guy who put Daniel Hale behind bars for his truthful disclosures to a media outlet about the drone program. So again, they very deliberately chose this particular court, and this prosecutor, clearly doesn't think that there's any kind of public interest value to telling the truth about illegal and often criminal conduct by the government.
I was sitting next to you, or I was watching you, Tom, during that sentencing date there, and I know you were watching very closely. Any thoughts about Gordon Kronberg?
He actually reminded me of my own the chief prosecutor, William Welsh, in my case, very similar in terms of just body language and wanting to put your head on a pike. I actually was having flashbacks as he was speaking, because it just reminded me of all those many hours that I spent inside a sealed courtroom, having to listen to Welsh as the chief prosecutor and his sidekick go on and on about the damage that I had allegedly caused the national security of the United States by virtue of my own disclosures. I think it's important to note here that in some ways the government, it's always the end state. The end state in this case is they just want to make examples of people, and they know that by making examples, they establish precedent. You now have multiple cases. And the latest, of course, Hale, in terms of whistleblowers, Hale and Reality Winner. There's a number of others even that preceded them, who also, ended up being hung out to dry by the government to make examples of them. So they now have established that the Espionage Act is legitimate, quote unquote, illegitimate. I call it illegitimate. But this is the injustice system actually going after those who dare hold up a mirror to power. And so if they are able to get their claws into Julian in the United States, I think it's a fait accompli. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that if he's in the United States, they'll strip him of all of his rights because he's now on U.S. soil, and they're just going to go after him full blower, and he'll never see the light of day. My concern right now, legitimately, is whether he can survive all that. I think his health is very precarious. I think it's actually worse than people are even saying, just based on what I'm reading and even between the lines. Yes, there is the appeal to the Supreme Court, and then there's ultimately the European court system. But even in the United Kingdom, they're trying to overturn Great Britain's. Basically, they're having to obey, as it were, European law. They're trying to get themselves out from under that, based on, as I understand it, statute of limitations. And so there's other forces in motion here to make it even more challenging for Julian, whether you call it coincidental or not, to actually make the case for appeal. There are very good lawyers in the loop, but they're up against the state. They're up against the national security apparatus. They're up against what I call compromised judiciary on both sides.
Jesslyn, some of the evidence against them we know has been forged, including this gentleman, Ziggy, who has a laundry list of convictions for child abuse and embezzlement. Why isn't that playing a role in the public discourse? Not just that UC Global scandal, the whole deal with the British Crown Prosecutor Services, strong arming Marian Nye, the Swedish prosecutor. There's so much here that makes a case fall apart. Why isn't that having any impact?
That's not having any impact because there seems to be a media blackout on anything Assange. present company excluded. But Siggy's false information. I mean, the thing to me that should have gotten this case dismissed immediately was when the assassination plot came out. And the fact that that was ever contemplated and given serious thought at upper levels of the government, that alone would tank any case I have ever seen in my life. It would so irreversibly, irretrievably taint the proceeding. And it's shocking, shocking that that became public and that they're still continuing. It just shows how brazen and how unafraid they are and how much they hate Julian Assange. I mean, they've personalized it. They also think because he's politically unpopular and not flavor of the week, and the people caricature him in various ways. That has nothing to do with the actual danger of using the Espionage Act on him. Normally, there's been so much misconduct in this case that it wouldn't be prosecutable, except when you're in a jurisdiction like the Eastern District of Virginia and the Espionage Act, which can shroud everything in secrecy. Even Daniel Hale's proceeding during a hearing that was supposedly open to the public, even myself as one of his attorneys, was locked out of the courtroom. So when I say it's Kafkaesque, that's not hyperbole, that's a fact.
It really is Kafkaesque. Tom, I'm looking at this whole legal process. Was the whole novel already written and they're not changing the epilogue? This is already set in motion and they don't care what gets in. They're not going to include it into the story.
No, that's quite accurate, Randy. It doesn't matter. They're just going to push forward. I think the only hope of any change is it's going to take the New York Times, Post, and others, and even including the international press, which have in fact, come out on the side of how dangerous this would be to actually extradite Assange, because obviously it would implicate them as publishers as well, even for publishing their own nation state secrets or any other nation state secrets for that matter that are considered unauthorized for a particular state. I mean, just think about the precedent here. You even have other countries who say, hey, there's a US reporter who actually revealed something that we don't want our own people to know. Guess what? We're going to take them out. That's what it's going to take. And we're at a very, very late date on all this. If you're going on 11 plus years with Assange having been house arrested and then ultimately asylum was granted, but then asylum was taken away, and now he's in Belmarsh. Now he's facing extradition. I really fear for his future, and I'm actually fearing for the future. If I speak just directly about my own country, the United States, the further erosion of the First Amendment. I mean, what's that's supposed to be a fundamental right, and what's the protection, right? When the government itself is considering it to get in the way, because they keep making all these carve-outs. They keep making all these national security exceptions. Remember, they define WikiLeaks, Pompeo speak, as a non-state hostile intelligence actor, agent. So I mean, that gives them excuses. I mean, they said that I was worse than a spy, that I would have. Remember, they've even said this of Assange, just like they said of Assange. They said of me that I have the blood of American soldiers, American troops on my hands. Right? They actually allege that in the courtroom. So this shows you how far they're willing to go to paint you into a really, really dark corner, and then throw everything they can at you. This is pathological. This is where the history is ringing in my ear. You don't have to go back very far, into 20th century history to understand what happens when authoritarianism and even the rise of fascism decides to go after it, quote unquote, its own enemies. And one of the first places they go to shut down any kind of alternative perspective or the truth is the press. And obviously that puts publishers, that puts reporters and journalists at extraordinary risk. We're already seeing, in terms of certain indexes around the world, what the danger is of being a reporter when you're actually touching on matters that the state and others wish to keep secret.
Jocelyn, I mean, that sounds very grim and ominous, Tom, but I concur with everything you just said. Jocelyn, it's like we've been doing this for 7 years, almost. You 11 years, Tom. What do we do at this point? I mean, more people are getting involved, but what's the answer now? I mean, what can the public do to help Assange extricate himself from this grave situation?
Well, I know there are a number of petitions going around, and I know media organizations have denounced this prosecution. I think there needs to be a lot more coverage of this case by the media. And I think the media needs to do something akin to what Dan Ellsberg recently did when he said, I am revealing classified information right now, said something classified, and then said, come after me. I think journalists should do that. We published classified information today that the government doesn't want you to hear. We would like to call the Justice Department and know why they're not prosecuting us for espionage. I know that would be way beyond the pale for most media outlets to do that. But again, they need to do something beyond signing a statement saying, oh, this is bad, or doing a few tweets about how this jeopardizes. I mean, they need to, I think, be pushed back a lot harder. That's what would need to happen. And the people who run these papers and the editors and the publishers need to make this a priority rather than only reporting on what the outcome was in the extradition proceeding. Nobody was covering it. It was up to people like Kevin Gosztola, alternative media. It was up to the blogosphere. It was up to all these subsidiary media outlets that it got any coverage whatsoever. And I say that as a hat tip to Kevin Gosztola that he covered it, and to Chip Gibbons and to people who are out there in the trenches. But the mainstream media, the corporate media, should be covering this. Lord knows they operated in tandem and together on a number of the WikiLeaks releases with Julian Assange. And the fact that they are radio silent right now and giving just a bare minimum update on the extradition proceeding after it had concluded, they need to step up now. And we'll see who has the moral courage to do it. But so far, the indicators are not good.
Craig Murray, let's not leave him out. He was definitely one of the finest, bloggers on this case, minute by minute blow, and with great commentary. And then he ended up going to one of your fellow Sam Adams awardees. That ended up in jail. And I think it had something to do with his coverage. I think that they wanted to keep him quiet. He wasn't there for the 27th and 28th of, is that possible that they the judicial system would time it at a critical moment during the hearing, Tom, to put someone like Craig Murray in jail?
I don't know. It's, you could say it's coincidental, but the fact remains that it seems like increasing across the board. This is where I try not to get too cynical about all this, because I realize that what's emerging here is a direct assault on the free press, period. The rise of authoritarianism, even in so-called democratic countries, is extraordinarily disturbing and very alarming to me. Obviously, my own case is giving me significant bias in that regard. Anybody who dares speak out or speaks up against any kind of secret power and the abuse of human rights, the abuse of law, is going to get hammered. And the closer you are to, quote unquote, those things that the government wishes to protect from the public are the very things that they're willing to basically stand on, to go after you with the full fury of the state judiciary. and law enforcement systems. I mean, that's partly what's happening here is that you're increasingly seeing the state apparatus behind the scenes, then combining forces to ensure that people like Assange are duly prosecuted. And here you got two countries that are actually involved. I mean, what I find also exceptionally extraordinary here is that this is going after a foreign, I mean, in terms of the United States, Assange is not a US citizen. Okay, so the actual US law doesn't apply, except they've decided that it does because it's a national security case. And that's the part where, in essence, the jurisdiction is anywhere in the world. But that's no different than what was launched after 9/11, is that the world became the battlefield. It didn't matter who you were or where you were. The US argued that they could go anywhere. And so in this case, they're deciding they want to take out Assange, whether he dies first or whether they bring him to the United States through the extradition process and then hang him out to dry and then stick him into a maximum security prison and incredibly isolated. Well, yeah, hey, he deserved it.
Picking up on what Tom said, I would just say also, in terms of timing, another, I'll put coincidence in scare quotes, is that the US won its appeal against Assange on Human Rights Day while hosting a summit for democracy. And just the tragic irony, whether it's coincidence or just a really like morbid joke on the part of the government, it just shows what kind of territory we're in. That all of this, the greatest assault on press freedom in the last 50 years, is happening at a time we're supposedly celebrating being a free and open democratic society that protects journalists.
We have just a few minutes left. I'm going to ask Tom. I wanted to ask you this question about what some of the things that WikiLeaks expose, particularly Vault 7, that people don't know about. Can you explain to our listeners the impact or the magnitude of Vault 7?
Well, I mean, just in summary, I mean, it's tools used to, break into systems and around the world. I mean, that's basically what Vault 7 is. Obviously, the CIA was pretty hyper about any exposure of their tool set that allows them to go. But hey, what the heck? We're a state entity. We're the CIA. We can go steal secrets whenever we feel like it. Sort of what Hayden said. We steal secrets. That was actually where that quote came from, by the way. Stealing secrets is something the United States loves to do, and they want to do it in secret. So, exposing something they're doing in secret gets you on the wrong side of the government. And then, hey, if it's that sensitive, we're going to come after you. And, how dare you? How dare you expose because it's a national security secret? Gee, why is it a national security secret? Because we don't want people knowing, the public, we don't want them knowing what we're actually up to. I mean, people keep forgetting. This is the concern I actually have, is that you got to focus on the actual actions of the secret side of government. And why would they put themselves behind the veil of national security? They do so because they want to operate in the dark. They do so because it allows them to get away with things they normally could not when exposed to the light of day. That's the bottom line of all this. And if you happen to be a whistleblower, we're going to hammer you with the Espionage Act. If you happen to be the publisher in which that whistleblower went to or a source went to, guess what? Now, if we can get the precedent with Assange, we can go after any publisher. We can go after any media outlet who, quote unquote, reveals something that's unauthorized. The hypocrisy is that the government itself is the greatest leaker of all time. But that when they leak, it's authorized.
Yeah. Wow. Jesslyn, you represented Snowden. He's in Russia. I don't think he has any thoughts about returning to this country. What would happen to Ed Snowden if he were to return to this country? Same thing as Assange?
Wow.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. They brought charges. Yes, absolutely. He would be subject to the Espionage Act. Everything would immediately become secret. You can't follow these proceedings because it's like reading tea leaves. Pretty much everything is done, at least at the preliminary stages, completely behind closed doors in classified hearings. And yes, he would face exactly the same the same kind of fate that Daniel Hale did, and that Julian Assange did, and that Tom Drake could have faced, that Chelsea Manning did face, that Jeffrey Sterling faced, and John Kiriakou, and Reality Winner, and Daniel Hale. The US has now taken something. Tom's case was an outlier. Nothing like that had happened for 40 years. But now, with all these Espionage Act prosecutions, they have completely normalized using a law that's meant supposedly to go after spies, to go after journalists and publishers and writers. And technically, you could even go after people who read that writing. I mean, that's the absurdity of the length of the Espionage Act. You could go after anyone who happened to hear or read those disclosures too. That's how overbroad the law is. But unfortunately, it's been upheld as constitutional.
We're at the closing here, a few minutes. What I'm going to do now is, Jessalyn got the first question early on. Tom, your final thoughts, and then we're going to go out on this whole matter with Julian Assange.
I mean, you're back to the human condition, and there are those who wish to have control and power over others. It's incredibly the temptations, it's seductive of doing so, having control and power over others, especially secret power over others. And this is where, in today's modern world, the combination of political power combined with technology is extremely potent. I mean, that combination right there. And when the state decides to go after you for daring to expose or daring to reveal the abuse of power, the misuse of power, then they have the power to take you out. I'm exhibit number one in that regard in terms of what happened after 9/11. And yet, I look with sadness and tragedy of all the cases that followed me. This is just the continuing de-evolution of democracy across the world. And that should be of great, great concern to all of your listeners.
All right. Thank you very much. If you have anything, Jessalyn, you want to add to that before we go?
I would say that the US has tried to keep Assange's case under wraps. That's the government. But newspapers should step up and do their part. They should be covering these proceedings. They should be doing editorials on these proceedings, and they need to show up in these cases. The fact that cases like Reality Winner and Daniel Hale, other Espionage Act cases, transpire largely in secret when the media could have been there, it speaks volumes. I mean, there was like one media outlet at Daniel Hale's sentencing. It was tragic on so many levels, and everyone needs to show up, not just sign a pretty petition once in a while.
Yeah, and I would say I think a lot of people need to start getting on the street before they water down the First Amendment even more and restrict the right to assembly. I want to thank both two heroes of mine, Jessalyn Radack and Thomas Drake, for being part of this and for your years of service. Your two distinctive profiles and courage. And I hope more people step up like the two of you have and go public when you have to in the service of this democracy to try to keep it afloat. And I'm a little rambling here, but it's really been great seeing both of you again. It's been too long, and continue the good work. that you've always done. I'm Randy Credico. This has been Randy Credico live on the fly here on the Progressive Radio Network with another special edition of Assange Countdown to Freedom. We'll see you next week.